Welcome to a history of the Raleigh Fire Department. My name is Mike Lagaris, and I usually give this presentation in person to the new recruit class of Raleigh firefighters. This year I had a scheduling conflict, so we're going to do a recorded version that people can watch on demand. The slides that I'm showing are available at lagaris.com/slides if you want to look at them later. A little bit about me. My day job is I work as a digital marketer. And a long time ago, I was a Raleigh firefighter. I've been the department's civilian historian now for some 15 years. I'm an incident photographer. I have credentials, and you'll see me at fire and emergency scenes. I've been doing that for some 20 years. I'm an author, a fire buff. I have social media sites, a blog, and hundreds, thousands of web pages out there about Raleigh and Wake County and North Carolina fire history. You may have seen some of the books that I've written. I've also worked on some of the Raleigh Fire Department's commemorative yearbooks over the years, and recently did a book history on the North Carolina State Firefighters Association. All that and more you can find at lagaris.com. I'm also on the board of the Raleigh Fire Museum. I am their secretary at present and a founding member. We are a nonprofit charitable organization that has a mission to present and preserve the history of the Raleigh Fire Department. You can visit our website or come out to our museum, which is open on the second Saturday of each month, presently located in a modular building at the Raleigh Fire Department Training Center. We're going to learn about the Raleigh Fire Department, which today is comprised of 6 divisions: the Office of the Fire Chief, the Office of the Fire Marshal, Operations and Logistics, Professional Development, and Emergency Management. And we're going to learn how we got here today. So we're going to go back in time. We are going to be looking at 4 milestones, starting with the creation of the city, the first fire company and first fire engine, the first formal fire department, and the creation of a fully paid career fire department. So we're going to go back in time. We're going to go back before the 1900s, before the Civil War, all the way back to the late 1700s and colonial United States. 1792, and the city of Raleigh was created from scratch. It was a planned city. It was created as a seat for the state government because the state government and the state capital had been in a couple different locations and they wanted to settle down. And so they designed the city 1 square mile with a fixed and a very formal plan. You'll notice, among other things, there are 5 parks that were located around a center park, a central park in the center. And within the first 5 years, there were 699 residents. Now, back in the 1790s, there were really just a couple ways to protect from fire. Well, this is actually true today. You can either prevent them before they occur or extinguish them after they start. And back then, fire was a big problem because there were so many building materials that were flammable, wood used everywhere. This is not Europe. We did not have stone buildings in Raleigh, the way you would have had cheaper and easier to build frame buildings. And water was not an easy thing to come by. You would have to dig a well. We have no river going through the city, no nearby large lake or body of water. And of course, back then, fire is used for cooking, it's used for heating, and it's used for lighting. So fire is around you all the time, and it's a considerable danger if it catches something on fire and starts to spread. So some of the early fire protection measures that were in place, first off, the planners of the city, they designed the city streets to be extra wide to help prevent the spread of fire from block to block. And they also left many trees intact because that meant if buildings caught on fire on one block, the trees would absorb some of that radiant heat that could otherwise start a fire in buildings next door or nearby. Also, they had an early regulation, an early bit of city code that said you could not add additional wooden structures to the fronts of buildings. You couldn't extend a building out, which would add to the fire risk. By 1802, newspaper advertisements carried this. It said, "Hey, does anybody want to contribute to a fund to buy a fire engine?" And Raleigh at the time, we had a couple different newspapers, and as best as I can tell, no such fire engine was ever purchased. And when we talk about a fire engine in 1802, we're talking about a small hand engine. You know, it's maybe what, 6 feet long, maybe even less than that. It's got handles to pump. You're going to use a chain of buckets, a bucket brigade from a well. You're going to dump that water into the tub, and you've got a nozzle that can swivel. That's also why they would call these early engines hand tubs. Well, the first major fire eventually happened June 11th, 1816. Required dozens of volunteers with a bucket brigade, and there were 51 buildings that were destroyed. And the way the fire was controlled was through the use of blasting. They blew up some of the buildings in the path of the fire as a way to create a fire break. As a result, the city officials ordered a fire engine, the one that had been considered and advertised about over a decade earlier. They also, 2 years later, attempted a water system. They used some wooden pipes and tried to bring water from Walnut Creek, and the system really didn't work too well. So within 3 years, they order the fire truck. It finally arrives. It comes from Philadelphia. And that's not a picture of the actual truck. That's a sort of a catalog or generic picture. But the fire truck that arrived very likely looked like that. They also formed the first fire company, a company of volunteers who would operate the fire engine. Now, back at that time, the fire company, that was considered somewhat of a prestigious role. And so the members of the first fire company were prominent citizens, including like Joseph Gales, who was the publisher of the Raleigh Register, the local newspaper. From 1819 to 1843, fire protection waxed and waned. And as a side note, it also the fire company wasn't really that busy because there really weren't a lot of fires. You know, maybe a couple fires a year, and thus there wasn't that recurring excitement that would compel people to want to be part of the fire company. It also meant that interest would be lost. People would wander off and not want to be part of the fire brigade. So to add the incentive, city officials said, okay, 1821, if you volunteer to be on the fire company, you're exempt from militia duty. Then they doubled down and said, okay, by 1826, you better volunteer because otherwise you may get drafted to help fight fires. In 1831, another major fire, the state capitol, it was called the State House, the first state capitol burned. And as a result, they rebuilt the capitol using stone and brick and began using stone and brick for government buildings because it's more fire safe. In 1838, the city adopted its first formal building regulation for fire protection. In 1843, we ordered a second fire engine. We now had two, and a second fire company was created. And that takes us to mid-century 1851. And by this time, there had been a couple different conflagrations. In the 1830s, there were a couple of them that burned a lot of buildings. The last big one on record was in 1851 in December. This time, over 17 structures were destroyed. And as a result, after this fire, the newspapers were full of editorials and everybody clamoring, we've got to have better fire protection. And so ordinances were adopted that would give us a better water supply, better fire equipment. They would build the first engine house. They'd hire the first fire chief. and reorganize the fire department to become really the first formal fire department in Raleigh's history. And I'm going to show you now a timeline. This is part of a larger visual history that's available on my website. And we're looking here at the years before the Civil War. And by 1852 is when we reorganized the fire department. And we now have three of them. We have two engine companies and a hook and ladder company. And it was called hook and ladders because their equipment was ladders and hooks. And hooks were metal hooks attached to chains and rope, and these hooks could be used to pull roofing material down from a burning roofs on top of a building, and it could also be used to pull a building down itself, because fire breaks were one way to stop the spread of fire from building to building. If you had, four buildings in a row, two of them have caught fire, the third's getting ready to catch, you could use your chains, collapse, and pull down that third building to save the fourth and prevent the fire from spreading. As we move up to the Civil War, we see the evolutions of the fire companies. And then after the Civil War, we're going to see some changes, some new names. One thing that I will note is we don't really know about the impact of the Civil War itself on the fire department in Raleigh. Again, fires were very rare. I suspect that the members of the fire companies and the men in general in Raleigh were probably going off to war. The capital city was not impacted like other southern cities with, fires or any sort of intentional devastation. And once the Civil War was over, fire companies began to get reorganized. And you see here in this diagram some of the different names. You'll also notice there Fire Company 1. And then in 1861, I've got Fire Company 1 and I've got a C. And that C stands for colored because back at that time period, as was custom, the fire companies were segregated by black and white members. This is something that was similar statewide. And in Raleigh, we had black only fire companies, the most prominent of which was called the Victor Company. They were organized in 1869, and then in 1970, they won a contest at the state fair. They were called the Victors. It was a fire engine contest, and thus they took the name of the Victor Company. Now, I want to interrupt that timeline a little bit, and I want to just talk about some components of the fire department in the 1850s and later. First, apparatus. So the fire trucks of the time included 5 hand engines. The city had 5 of them from 1819 to 1873. They got larger as the decades progressed. The last one, the Victor Company engine, you see a catalog drawing there. It was made by Rumsey and Company, and that's a long engine. That's 6, 8, 7 feet, and the men would stand on either side of it, and it had a suction hose. You drop down into a well, you'd hook up a hand line, pump the water. Those are all hand powered and pulled by hand. Then the first steam powered fire engine arrives, 1870. It's for a new group called the Rescue Company. And that steam engine, believe it or not, is pulled by hand for the first 7 or so years. Then they finally get horses. Now, it sounds crazy, pulled by hand. Well, remember, Raleigh's only a mile square, so it's not the greatest distance. Also, um, fires are very rare. And from newspaper accounts, it sounds like you might have as many as 100 people showing up helping to pull that steam engine. There were 2 chemical engines that were delivered in the 1870s and 1881. These are very similar to the old chemical fire extinguishers you may have seen, or old soda extinguishers. A giant big brass extinguisher, and it's got a hose on the end, and you turn it upside down, and it starts spraying water. That's because inside that tank, there's a little bottle of baking soda. And that baking soda, you turn the extinguisher upside down, the baking soda gets released, and it adds pressure to the water. The pressure sprays out of the hose. Same principle applies to these chemical engines. They were one-time use, then you would have to go and recharge them. So you had a single tank chemical engine and a double tank. The double tank was later horse-drawn. There were also 3 ladder trucks or ladder wagons during this time period. Each of them would get bigger, initially hand-drawn and later horse-drawn. The water supply that the fire department used, well, we started with wells, standard city wells, and then in 1852, after the big fire, they said, okay, we're going to build some cisterns. And the cisterns you see here were located, including 2 at the state capitol. And these cisterns started just being 7,000 gallons. And 7,000 gallons, when you had just a hand pump, well, that's pretty good. That hand pump maybe 200 gallons a minute, maybe 300. So 7,000 gallons, perfectly suitable for firefighting needs. But once they added a steam engine in 1870, you needed more water. So the cisterns increased in capacity 10,000, 30,000, 50,000. The cisterns were fed by a gutter system, so when it rained, the rain would sluice down through the gutters and fill up the cisterns. These cisterns were later removed decades later, although a couple of them survived, and as recently as, say, about the last 5 or 6 years ago, up on maybe Harrington Street, city workers were installing some utility lines. They dug down into the street, and guess what they found? One of the old cisterns. In 1887, we made a leap. We went from underground tanks of water to a pressurized, mechanically fed water system, a waterworks. And that waterworks provided water now for everybody's use and fire hydrants. Now, these are stock photos. These are not from Raleigh. The hydrants, these new hydrants, there were 120 of them. They had 2 outlets. You see the measurements there for pressure. And by the spec, the requirement for the system that the builder had to build was that you had to be able to supply 8 separate sections of fire hose spraying water. Because the way these new hydrants worked is if you had a fire, you brought the hose to the nearest hydrant, connected it, opened the hydrant, and sprayed water. You did not need a hand engine, you didn't need a steam engine. It was called hydrant pressure, and then if you needed a little more, you would call the water plant and they gave you what was called direct pressure. As a result of this, fire apparatus changed a bit. Instead of needing that hand engine and steam engine on every call, now you just needed to get hose to the fire. So we started with some hose reels. These were big giant reels. And then we have evolved to hose wagons. Now around the same time, fire hose is evolving. Fire hose used to be made of leather and it had metal rivets and it was really hard to manipulate. You had to wrap it in a reel. You had to oil it, prevent it from cracking and getting ruined. Well, this new canvas rubber lined hose, you could lay it flat. You could either wrap it on a reel or you could lay it accordion style. Well, that accordion style is the same style we use today in a modern piece of fire apparatus and a hose bed. The top photo you're seeing there, that's the Capitol Hose Company. They are standing in front of the old Central Fire Station, which was on West Morgan Street, and they are dressed in those outfits because those are their competition clothes. Because by this time, there was a state firefighters association that had been created, and they would have annual tournaments. And the Capitol Hose Company was one of those teams that would go and participate. Otherwise, bottom left picture there, you see the rescue company. They're wearing their everyday clothes, and that is what they would fight fire in because volunteer firefighters would come from work or home when there was a fire. Here's a hydrant map to kind of fill in the picture a little better. You see the red dots are fire hydrants. The red crosses are the locations of the fire stations, and then there are some blue stars. Those blue stars were the fire alarm boxes. I'll talk about those in just a minute. Engine houses. The early engine houses included Metropolitan Hall, upper left. It was a big municipal building, and it had what were called engine rooms on the first floor. Also in 1870, the Rescue Engine Company built their first fire station. It was on Fayetteville Street. In 1887, after the fire hydrants were installed and these new hose companies were formed, the Capital Hose Company occupied this building that was at the base of the old water tower. That building had an office for the water company and it had a bay for the hose reel. And if you go to that building, and it's still there today, you can look closely on the front and you can see where the original bay doors were located. 1896, the original headquarters fire station was built, a grand looking building. And in 1898, the Victor Company had a new fire station built. This was at the corner of Hargett and Blunt Streets. How were they notified by fires, you may wonder? Well, up until 1888, up until that time, there was a city bell at the head of Fayetteville Street, and you'd ring that if there was a fire. Then a street box system was installed with a bell. All right, I need to back up. So we have the old city bell at the foot of Fayetteville Street. Then in 1870, the bell you're seeing there is installed at the top. That bell is installed at the top of Central Fire Station, and that bell is rung 1 to 4 times, depending upon if the fire is in one of the 4 sections of the city. The bell is later modified to have one of 5 different rings because they considered the center of the city to be the fire district. Then, now see, I need to correct myself yet again. That's what I get. I haven't done this in a year. So we're going to go back, cut, rewind. 1870, that bell you see center is delivered, but it's first put in the clock tower of Metropolitan Hall. That's the building there in the lower left that was built in 1870. All right, now we've got this right. The fire bell is rung 1 to 4 times, later 1 to 5 times. Then in 1888, these street boxes, fire boxes, are installed, and they're connected to that bell, and they have a number, a 2-digit number. And so box 12, for example, is going to ring the code of 1, 2. 1 ring, 2 rings, repeat, 1 ring, 2 ring. And then the firefighters are going to go to that location to find the fire. The fire boxes were initially locked, believe it or not. And you had to first go find the key holder, then unlock the box and transmit the fire alarm. But the fire chief was able to convince city officials, let's not do that. And the boxes were unlocked very quickly. Then in 1914, yeah, I'm going to have to check my time for this. I'm going to have to pause myself because the picture on the right shows the bell was later moved from Metropolitan Hall, and it was moved and put on top of the tower outside of Station 1. It was later moved, I think maybe in 1914, it was moved to the top of the tower at Station 1. And it's there. It's not hanging, it's just sitting right there on top of the tower. That bell still survives to this day, and it's presently located inside the Raleigh Fire Museum. Now, this map here, 1888, shows you where these fireboxes were. And if you'll look closely, you'll see the fireboxes, they're a number of blocks away. So if you have a fire, this is going to narrow the location down a bit, but it's nothing as precise as what you would get first when they added more and more boxes within the city limits, and then, of course, today with reporting a fire location by telephone. Okay, we covered apparatus, water supply, engine houses, the alarm system. Let's go back to our timeline. And these are the milestone dates that we just noted. I do want to point out here, you see we have our first fire horses in 1879, and we retired the last hand-drawn apparatus in 1890. The fire horses are really only going to be used until about 1914, so we're only going to have about 35 years or so of fire horses. I know the popular image, the one in your imagination of the steam engine with the billowing smoke and the horses galloping, that's the old-fashioned fire service. Well, here, at least in Raleigh, that really only was about a 35-year span. Now we come to the turn of the last century, 1900, and by this time the city has expanded. The city is now 1.8 square miles in size. We've got 13,600 residents, 3 fire stations, 4 fire companies, 90 volunteer firemen. The big thing that's going to happen during this decade is we're going to get a new steam engine because by this time, the 1870 Gould, it was built by Gould, the 1870 steam engine was not working. It was, as they said, out of repair. The fire chief said, we have some taller buildings and there's always the chance the pumping station, there's always a chance the pumping station could go out of service or have a malfunction. So we should have a working steam engine. A new American LaFrance steamer was ordered, delivered in 1905. That piece of apparatus is still on the roster. Today, you can go see it. It's in the bay at Fire Station 6 on Fairview Road. 1910, we're now coming up to one of our next major milestones in the department's history. So let's look closely here at this map. 1910, we have 4 square miles. The city's expanded again. We've got over 19,000 residents. And look at this, we got 127 volunteer firefighters. Now I want you to pay attention to that number because by this time, the city's under the scrutiny of insurance underwriters. And they came and they said, look, you all are doing the best you can with your volunteer fire department, but we think you need to make the change and look into full-time firefighters. You need to start looking at motorized fire engines, and if you don't, we're going to raise your fire insurance rates. So 1912 starts the initiative. Raleigh will have a paid department, and the first fire chief was Sherwood Brockwell. He was the previous foreman on the volunteer rescue steam engine company, and he became the city's first paid fire chief. The new full-time fire department was placed in service at the end of 1912. These were the first full-time firefighters. They're sitting back behind Station 1. They're wearing what we used to call the bus conductor caps. There were no fire helmets back then, and they wore some of these formal coats when they were fighting fire. The city took over the facilities and equipment of the volunteer fire companies. So the station on West Morgan Street became Station 1, the rescue company station on Fayetteville Street, Station 2, and the Victor quarters on Hargett Street became Station 3. Volunteer fire companies were put out of commission. Also, this was an entirely white fire department. We will not see black firefighters again, not full-time on the roster until early 1960s. If we look at this chart, if we look at follow our timeline chart, we'll see that the various volunteer companies map to their later designation as a hose company, called a hose company to start, hose company 1, hose company 2. Within a few years, we're going to call them engine company 1, engine company 2. So we had 3 hose companies, 3 horse-drawn hose companies, and then they're going to, as needed, bring the ladder truck, the hook and ladder truck by horse, or if they need the steam engine, they'll bring that by horse. But we want an upgrade. We want to get more modernized, and so we order the first 2 pieces of motor apparatus. These are a pair of American LaFrance chemical and hose cars. They arrived in 1913. And Chief Brockwell, he even went to the American LaFrance plant to help work on those trucks. He had gone to NC State and had an engineering degree. Another thing about Chief Brockwell is he went and did an internship with the New York City Fire Department, FDNY, and spent some time there, made headlines when he did a heroic rescue and so forth. Also, at this time, Station 2 was moved because the county decided, we're going to build a new courthouse. They needed the land that the rescue station was on, that was now Station 2. So Station 2, a new Station 2 was built on South Salisbury Street, and that opened in 1914. In 1914, we also get our first motor pumper, our first motorized pumping engine, and in 1916, our first aerial ladder. It was a 75-foot, two-section wooden ladder. It's initially raised by springs. The springs would raise it to about 30, 35 degrees, and then you would crank it to raise or extend it from there. Also, Raleigh's first fire apparatus was white with blue and gold trim. So by 1920, look at the numbers here. We went from 127 volunteer firemen in 1910 to now around 30 full-time firefighters providing the same level of fire protection. The full-time firefighters, I believe the way the schedule worked is they were basically working every day. You come to work every day, you've got some shift time off, you've got time off for meals. The city's now almost 7 square miles, 3 fire stations, closing in on 25,000 residents. The city is also expanding. They're looking to where growth is happening, just like we do today. And they said, we need a new fire station on the north side and the northwest side. And so new Station 4 on Jefferson Street and Station 5 on Park Drive were opened. Station 4 still exists today. It was never demolished. It's now a private-owned residence. Station 5 on Park Drive is the same location as current Station 5. They built a new station beside the old one in the 1960s. We would add another ladder truck in 1922, an American LaFrance combination service truck, meaning it had a chemical tank and a hose reel, and it was operated by one set of firefighters. So depending upon the fire, they would either hop on the aerial ladder truck or they would hop on the service ladder truck. We also started adding additional pumpers. We would add pumpers in 1924, 25, and then 2 of them in 1926. In 1924, the 2-platoon system was created. Firefighters are no longer coming to work every day now. They come to work on separate days, and you've got day watch and night watch schedules for their work. Some of the major fires that happened starting in the 20th century: News and Observer Building, Tompkins Hall at what was called A&M College, today it's NC State, the Insane Asylum at Dorothea Dix, and here a picture of the Yarborough Hotel on Fayetteville Street. This was the biggest hotel between Washington, D.C. and Atlanta. Very prominent. A lot of politicians would come here after the Civil War, after the occupying army camped in the governor's mansion. The governor relocated to Yarborough, the Yarborough Hotel, as a place to stay. This fire so big that Durham and Smithfield both sent engines to help. And if you look closely at this picture, and you can see it, say you can go to the Fire Museum website and see this picture, there are hundreds of people watching. There are citizens helping. There are folks on adjoining rooftops spraying water. The building was demolished. It was never rebuilt. By 1930, notice the city is now expanded. The city limits have expanded to the north and the west, and you can see now where we've got Engine 4 and Engine 5. This is the same sort of pattern that's done today. As the city expands, the city will try to preemptively put a fire station either where development is happening, or once development and expansion has happened, the city will add a fire station to protect that area. In the 1930s, some things that happened of note: the City Auditorium burned in 1930. It adjoined City Hall, and as a result, they opened what was called the War Memorial Auditorium, later shortened to just Memorial Auditorium, and in the basement of Memorial Auditorium, a fire station. New Station 2, they relocated from their old location. It moved Station 2 further south. We added just one new pumper in the 30s, a 1936 American LaFrance. And we bought a new front end for the old 1916 tiller. In the 1930s, the first local chapter of the International Association of Firefighters was chartered. That happened in 1938. However, well, hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before that happened, Raleigh firefighters gained civil service protection because back in the day, firefighters were political appointees, fire and police, and you could, everybody could be fired, and all new people could be hired depending upon when a new public safety commissioner was hired. That was ended with the passage of civil service protection. Then we have the first labor organization in 1935, Local 548. Then in 1959, the state said, no more locals. And the local ceased operating, but then there was a ruling. The federal government overturned it in 1968. I believe it was the Charlotte Fire Department local that helped fight that. In 1969, Local 548 was rechartered. Then it was rechartered again in 1986. Today, the organization is called the Raleigh Professional Firefighters Association. You can also see them sometimes branded as the Capital City Firefighters. Now, as we get close to World War II and the war years in 1940, population now approaching 50,000, got about 56 members in the fire department. And we're going to make a big change to the fire station locations because by this time, Station 1 on Morgan Street really in bad shape. By 1938, or in 1938, the bell tower had been condemned, and so that was demolished. And the building was having structural issues. And so they closed Station 1 in 1941. They said, okay, we're going to build a new fire station. They picked a site on Dawson Street. We're going to build a new fire station. We can't build it just yet. So they opened up old Station 2 downtown and they moved both Engine 1 and from Station 2, they moved Engine 2 into old Station 2. All right, you're following me. So we've got two engines at old Station 2. It's now called Station 1 on Salisbury Street. Then they took the ladder, the aerial ladder truck and the service ladder truck, and they moved those to Memorial Auditorium. This is my supposition that once you had two engines at Station 1, starting in 1941, the fire department was like, this works out pretty good. And it's my speculation that this is why today we have two engines at Station 1. They had them there at Station 2 for many years. Then when they built the new Station 1 in 1953, it would open with two engine companies, and we've had two at Station 1 since that time. 1941, December 7th, United States enters World War II, and this has a big impact. For starters, civilian defense suddenly becomes a concern. Will enemy forces attack the city of Raleigh? So we start having air raid drills. We organize groups of auxiliary firefighters. These are volunteers that are trained in case they have to do firefighting or rescue. There are also material restrictions. A little side note here about the auxiliary firefighters. There were 4 or 6 companies of them, including one company of black auxiliary firefighters. They would have practice, drills, and even they would have some occasional games. Now, I talk about material restrictions. That meant that we couldn't buy new fire apparatus, and it took longer to build the fire stations that the city had been planning to build. So, for example, Fire Station 6 started, they realized by the mid-40s they needed another fire station in what was called the Bud Lee area up near Fairview and Oberlin Road. And so initially they rented half of a building at 2519. It was formerly used as a soda shop. And then 6 years later, they built a dedicated fire station just down the block, the original or the second Fire Station 6. But some of the material restrictions meant it took a bit longer before they could build that fire station. The same thing was true of Station 1. They wanted to build a new Station 1 where it is today, but it ended up taking them a decade before they could build it. Some of the developments during the 40s, we added an auxiliary truck, also called a squad truck. The first one was added around 1943, and it had a car wreck. It struck a Greyhound bus in 1947. So the second one you're seeing here was a 1948 Ford. This had 2 people assigned to it. This also may have been a way to help deal with a shortage of manpower because during World War II, the fire department faced staffing shortages because its men would leave to either go work at higher paying jobs related to the war industry or they would get drafted. So you had this auxiliary truck, it could go and take on smaller fires. You don't have to take the big fire truck. This was also used for fire calls outside of the city limits. When Station 6 opened, when we needed a new engine for Engine 6, they bought a used American LaFrance pumper from Farmville, North Carolina. The first self-contained breathing apparatus arrived by the end of the decade, and the first 24-hour shifts were implemented by around 1949. Once the war was over and the nation's economy changing and prosperity begins and we're no longer on wartime footing, we were able to order new and modern fire apparatus. So in 1949, we ordered an FWD and a Mack pumper, the first new modern apparatus we've been able to order in over a decade. Also, the Fire Prevention Bureau was formed. This was formed as a separate division within the fire department, and these were members who would conduct fire inspections, checking for fire code violations, do fire safety education, and these roles and these sort of activities had been done from the beginning. If you go back to the 1880s, for example, you look at old annual reports, you'll see how the fire chief would have to do reviews of building plans. You know, if you wanted somebody who wanted to store, say, blasting powder within the city limits in a business, the fire chief would have to sign off on that. So fire prevention and all things related to inspection had always been within the purview of the fire department. They'd always been doing it. Chief Brockwell, Sherwood Brockwell, brought um, school safety front and center and conducted some of the first fire drills in the city. Chief Brockwell, by the way, he was only our first fire chief for 2 years. Then he became the first state fire marshal. He was succeeded by Charles Farmer. Now, Charles Farmer was his assistant chief. Charles Farmer became the second paid fire chief in Raleigh. And then Charles Farmer would later leave the city and become the first commander of the new highway patrol. Little fun fact for you there. In the photo that we're seeing here, if you look in the upper left, that's B.T. Fowler, Captain B.T. Fowler. He's also shown in the picture there in a classroom holding the fire extinguisher. His son Earl Fowler became a fireman and he became later chief of the department. 1950, we're now mid-century and the city's gonna really start growing. The fire department's gonna start growing. We see here we've got our 6 fire stations, still only 67 members on the roster. Some of the things that happened in the 50s. Well, we're going to open a new Station 1 in 1951. We're going to buy some open cab American LaFrance pumpers, and we're going to form a Raleigh Emergency Rescue Squad. This was formed as a volunteer group with vehicles that were operated and housed at the fire department. It all started because somebody drowned over at Raleigh Beach, over at the Neuse River, and the body was in the water for days. And the city manager called Fire Chief Jack Keeter and said, you know, can you get a couple people and get that body there out of the water? And they put their heads together and said, you know, let's form a rescue squad. And the Raleigh Emergency Rescue Squad would just later become the Raleigh Fire Department Rescue Unit. That what you're seeing there is one of 2 trucks. It was a 2-piece unit. It had a small truck that it went to most of its calls with, and then the big civil defense heavy rescue truck. We also in 1958 upgraded the aerial ladder. We now got a modern hydraulically operated steel American LaFrance tiller. We relocated Station 3, moving from the 1898 building on Hargett Street over to Southeast Street in 1951. The first training tower, the first dedicated training tower built in 1954 at the current location of the Fire Department Training Center. And we'll give you an aside there. So we saw the picture of Memorial Auditorium, right? Fire Station 2. Well, the backside of Memorial Auditorium was designed to also be used as a fire training center. It had a big paved area behind it, And firefighters would use their ladders, ground ladders and the aerial ladder, and they climb up the backside of Memorial Auditorium to use that as their training tower. Then in 1954, this brick tower was built, and that tower would be used for many decades. The Ladies Auxiliary. This was a subgroup of the IAFF local. These were wives of local 548 members. They would do charity events as well as bring food and coffee at fires. The Ladies Auxiliary operated for a good 20 years or so. We also opened Fire Station 7 in 1959, Engine 7, and there you see the old squad truck, which was still in operation at the time. The fire department experienced its first line of duty death in March 10th, 1956. Vernon Smith, he was a driver, or today what we would call a lieutenant. He died because 4 years earlier, he was driving Engine 6 as a reserve truck. So it's a 1926 American LaFrance, got a chain drive. The brakes were not working well. They were coming back from a fire call. There were 5 or 6 of them aboard, and it turned a corner over there on Lewis Farm Road. It overturned. Smith was injured, received numerous injuries, and he would end up going through dozens of surgeries over the next 4 years. He also had part of his leg amputated. He did not leave the department, though. He did not retire. He ended up working as a dispatcher, but he succumbed to his injuries in 1956. In 1959, the second line of duty death associated with the fire department, this was Robert Battle. He was a night jailer for the sheriff's department. He was a volunteer on the rescue squad. And in April 23rd, 1959, the squad went out to Lee County to help search on the Cape Fear River for a drowning victim. He, in turn, drowned. All right, now we're moving into the 60s, the swinging 60s. Notice the city, notice that green, the city is starting to grow. We're now over 90,000 residents. We've got 123 members in the department. And if you look closely at that map, you'll see that Engine 7, Station 7, is actually outside of the city limits initially. We're going to start building more stations to keep up with this growth. We're going to relocate Station 2 yet again. It's going to move further south down to Pecan Road. We're going to also build a shop building, a maintenance shop behind it. Previously, the maintenance shop was part of Station 2 that was there in the basement of Memorial Auditorium. We're going to open new Station 4. So we're going to take Station 4, we're going to move it from Jefferson Street and move it farther north to Wake Forest Road. And we're going to make a new Station 5. You know, the current Station 5 was now decades old. They built a new one right beside it. And there you see, that's a News and Observer photo showing you both buildings side by side. We're going to open Station 8, first in a rented building on what today is Method Road. And they're going to put the engine in a concrete block building next door. The firefighters built it themselves. Then they're going to relocate to Western Boulevard in 1963. Fire Station 9, today called North Hills, that was opened on Valentine's Day, 1963. And that's why every February 14th, if I can, I take a big old set of pink cupcakes or pink cookies to Fire Station 9 to celebrate their birthday. We built the smokehouse on the training grounds next to the training tower. We, meaning the firefighters, did. And this was very common for decades. If firefighters had skills, and many of them did, a lot of them were tradesmen that worked trades on the side. So firefighters with experience in construction, bricklaying, they built the smokehouse, and they used bricks that had been saved from old Station 5. The smokehouse was used to, you'd put wooden materials in there, light it up. Firefighters practice searching and using breathing air. Today, that building, still standing, is used for storage. And it also has a sort of the tool room for the logistics officer in the training division. Some of the apparatus that we're going to add in the 1960s, down in the lower right there, we added 2 tankers. Bet you didn't know that. Raleigh Fire Department had 2 tankers on the roster from 1960 to 1986. They did not have quick dump. They just had 2.5-inch outlets in the back, and they were used to cover the areas that didn't have hydrants when we would annex areas until we could get hydrants there. And they also helped protect this newfangled thing that was called the Beltline. We added newer service trucks built on commercial chassis trucks, locally built ladder bodies. These had 3-person crews. We added some newer 1960s open cab American LaFrance pumpers, and we added a second aerial ladder. So we added our second aerial ladder company, this one based initially at Station 5, Truck 5. 2 foam trucks were added on the roster, also in the 1960s. These came onto the fleet after there was a fire in Cameron Village, today called the Village District, big shopping center, one of the biggest new shopping center concepts here in the Southeast. There was a fire in one of the lower buildings, and there was a salesman in the area who had one of these trailer-drawn high-expansion foam generators. So he brought it to the scene, he demonstrated it. The owner of the shopping center, Willie York, he was so impressed, he said, "I'll buy one, but you have to keep it nearby at Fire Station 5." So 2 of these high expansion foam units were purchased, one put on a pick-me-up truck at Station 5, the other on a pickup truck at Station 1. They were very good for closed, confined spaces, if you will, but as you see in that picture on the right side, not as good outdoors. And what you're seeing there is the foam expansion being used at a rail car derailment and fire in Wake Forest. In 1963, we're going to hire and return black firefighters to the ranks of the Raleigh Fire Department. The first career black firefighters, 7 of them were hired in 1963 and 1964. They all but one were initially assigned to Fire Station 2, and they worked alongside the white firefighters. They were an integrated fire company, but they had segregated living quarters. Then within maybe 2 or so years, that company and the black firefighters were broken up and sort of moved around the city, and the fire department, at least from the living quarter perspective, was fully integrated. In 1965, April 20th, the second firefighter line of duty death, Paul Mims, died while operating the pump panel on engine 5 at a fire. He had a brother, Harry Mims. Harry worked on the opposite shift at Station 5. And if you look at the old logbook, from Station 5 that day, it says simply, P.A. Mims passed away. Then a day or so later, it says, Harry Mims off, funeral for brother. 1970, look at all that green. The city is growing by leaps and bounds, and we're going to see a huge number, a big number of fire stations added during this decade. We're going to build 6 of them, Station 10 through Station 16. No, there's no Station 13 because we're superstitious. And if you notice something else, have you seen a pattern here? Well, this is the same building design and had been used since Station 7 in 1959. And for a number of decades, the same general architectural style was used. It was the same architect, last name McGee, I believe, and we stopped using that architect because he died. In the 1970s, the next evolution of fire apparatus were these diesel-powered Max CF pumpers plus 1 Baker aerial scope. These were beloved trucks. The firefighters loved them. They were workhorses, and they served the city for decades. Some of the other apparatus that was delivered in the 70s, one more new service truck that was added on the roster. There's the aerial platform I mentioned. The old 1958 tiller received a new front end, a Mack tractor, and the rescue squad. It's now a 2-person unit. And in the 70s, we're going to expand. We're going to have 2 of them at Station 1 and Station 9 to begin with. They received the Chevy Murphy ambulance body rescue units. Also in the 1970s, the venerable fire alarm boxes, which had served so well and By the 1970s, there were, I don't know, 350 of them or so. Those were taken out of service, they were removed. Same time, there was a new city county emergency communication center that had started, and these alarm boxes were replaced with telephone boxes, partly as a way to prevent false alarms, which were becoming quite a problem in the city. Some of the milestones that happened in the 1970s: a third platoon or shift was added in 1970. We created the first districts or district chiefs. These were chief officers that supervised a group of fire stations. Today they're called battalions. We started our first EMT training. Firefighters trained as emergency medical technicians. And that allowed for the implementation of a first responder program so firefighters could start responding to medical emergencies. They're not just fighting fires, they are now going to where somebody's is having a medical emergency. They would typically get there before the ambulance and could begin offering medical care. We went from um, 2 battalions to 3 battalions in 1977. We had our first numbered recruit academy in 1978, and there's an asterisk there. I'll tell you about that in a second. And then the first female firefighters were hired in 1978. Now, let me explain that asterisk. So I say here the first recruit academy was hired in 1978, and that's not quite right. So there's this guy, Mike Lagares, back in the late 2000s. He said, "Hey, I'm gonna create this numbering scheme for all the academies," and I made, number one all the way to present day, and we started with 1978 because it seemed like that was when you really had your first formal fire academy, and everybody signed off, and we began retroactively renumbering the academies and then continuing it forward. Well, guess what? Yours truly found that there were actually some earlier formal academies. Today we can call them pre-academies. I don't know, Academy A, B, C, but the first recruit academy probably goes back even earlier to the earlier 70s. Now we're going to go faster. 1980 to 2010, a period of growth for the city of Raleigh. Here you see annexation maps from 1980 all the way to 2010 with the different colors representing the different annexation periods. The city opens many more fire stations during these decades, and from 1980 through the 2000s, all of these except one were new construction. In the early 2000s, Fire Station 23 was opened, and it used an existing facility, Durham Highway Fire Department's building, that the city leased and added additional space onto to create living quarters. New and different brands of fire apparatus were purchased during these decades. A couple more Macs, a pair of EEI pumpers, a Persh, the lone Persh we've ever had in the fleet, a number of Pierces, then apparatus built by Quality on Spartan chassis. We bought 4 American LaFrance pumpers and then went back to Pierce. A variety of aerial apparatus were also procured, ranging from rear mount aerial ladders, Seagrave, Simon LTI, a rear mount Simon LTI platform. We had a Pierce snorkel, a mid-mount American LaFrance, a Spartan Quality LTI Quint, and the first tiller in decades added in 2004. We also added a number of special units. The rescue trucks evolved from ambulance bodies, growing larger, to medium-duty rescue trucks, one of them, an international SVI added in 2002, and then a pair of heavy rescue trucks made by Pierce. The first air truck was put on the roster in the late 1980s, an extended step van, and then it was replaced with a smaller unit in 2002. The first hazmat unit was added in 1984, with subsequent larger units in later years and decades. And mini pumpers were added in 1986, 3 of them for use in such places as parking decks downtown, as well as wooded areas or off-road areas. They were since replaced with newer units in the recent decade or so, and a foam trailer was added in the late 2000s, around 2010. Some of the milestones over this period included added disciplines, firefighters doing more than just putting out fires. In the 1980s, first responder sending an engine to a life-threatening medical emergency. That program went citywide, as well as hazmat or hazardous materials response. In the 1990s, EMTD with defibrillators were added, as well as confined space rescue and high-level rescue disciplines. And in the 2000s, a swiftwater rescue team was formed, as well as Raleigh's participation in a new statewide urban search and rescue task force. The Raleigh Fire Department also participated in a new HART, Helicopter Aquatic Rescue Technician program, where trained members fly with North Carolina Highway Patrol or North Carolina Air National Guard helicopters. Also in the 2000s, one of the state's regional response hazmat teams relocated to Raleigh. Thus, we see by the end of the 2000s, firefighters in Raleigh, just as firefighters nationally, have become a sort of an all hazards discipline where people call the fire department for anything that happens, and they have a range of skills, including specialized skills, to mitigate the problems. Some of the milestones in the 1980s included the Keeter Training Center. This was a classroom building that was built on next to the training tower and the smokehouse. There you see a picture from when it opened in 1982. The Fire Investigation Team, the first arson investigators, formed in the 1980s. The first mobile air unit. An explorer post was formed in the 80s, and there you see in the lower left one of the members who's helping fill air bottles at a fire scene, and an honor guard. The Raleigh Fire Department Honor Guard was organized. I believe that was around 1984. One of the big fires in the 1980s was the Mangle Building on the Fayetteville Street Mall. Today, Fayetteville Street is a thoroughfare, it's a roadway, but for a couple of decades, it had been paved over or bricked over and turned into a pedestrian mall. And this building on a weekday caught fire, and it became a major fire that was watched by hundreds of people who were downtown that day. Over 100 firefighters, including 21 recruits, battled the blaze. It was a hot July day, and there were some 30 firefighters who received injuries, heat exhaustion, for example. And there was a collapse. Part of the building collapsed, though there were no injuries to the firefighters. Although Cindy Rubens, who was a firefighter at the time, used to tell the story that the chief said, pull back. And as she was running back, as they were running away from the building, she remembers one of the bricks striking the back of her leg as it had collapsed. 1988, another notable incident was the North Raleigh tornado. It touched down around Station 17 over off Glenwood Avenue, and it cut a path going northeast through the city. Here you're seeing the old Kmart building off Pleasant Valley Road. And that building became the command post and staging area for the incoming responders. So the Raleigh Fire Department and all the rescue squads in Wake County brought units and personnel to the scene, as did rescue units and personnel and county fire units from outside Raleigh. In the 1990s, some of our milestones included the first division chief, a chief officer who oversaw and managed each of the districts, or as we call them today, battalions. The first fire protection engineer, a civilian position under the Office of the Fire Marshal to help manage and inspect and fire protection systems. We had the first closed cab fire apparatus that was delivered in 1990, one to engine 3 and one to engine 5, and I rode engine 5, and it was glorious to have air conditioning in the summer. The EMT defibrillator program started in the 1990s. There you see one of the original units, giant, about the size of a car battery, and we have that in the Raleigh Fire Museum. We had a fire safety house that we obtained for fire education, and the first rapid intervention teams were added to fireground operations. A major incident in the 1990s was Hurricane Fran and the flooding that resulted after that storm came ashore. Here, this famous photo was shared by newspapers. It was a News and Observer photographer who caught a rescue of a stranded pedestrian, of a stranded motorist on South Wilmington Street near the Fire Department Training Center. And that is engine two. And as the story goes, they had to keep the truck in motion so it wouldn't stall, and the motorist jumped to safety. That famous photo today would get a number of people in trouble, as policies and protocols for water rescues are much, much different than today, than what you see here. In the 2000s, moving on to the next decade, some of the milestones included the addition of a 4th Battalion, an 8th Ladder Company, now full-time fire investigators. Previously, they were just part-time and worked, they cross-staffed. They were assigned to an engine company, and this added full-time investigators. A bike team for special events was created. A new training tower, the old brick training tower off of Wilmington Street, was demolished, and a new prefabricated building was erected. And this thing called a thermal imaging camera, probably one of the most notable innovations in the fire service in decades, that allows firefighters to see, look through walls, be able to see heat sources, and find where fire, heat, and smoldering materials are much, much easier than the older days of having to use an axe or other materials to cut into a wall, pry apart sections of a building. In 2003, Task Force 8 was organized along with other urban search and rescue teams around our state. This was a new statewide program, and Task Force 8 was comprised initially of Raleigh, Cary, Chapel Hill, and Durham fire departments, as well as Wake County EMS and Atlas Engineering as a partner. From 2006 and later, the training center and the training grounds were expanded. They added down what we call the lower pit area, a USAR training area. New training props were added. Shelters for vehicles and modular classroom buildings were added. And those are not shown because they are behind the trees in this photo that was taken, I believe, in 2012. In 2006, the Office of the Fire Marshal expanded when we added the construction division. These positions were previously in the City Department of Inspections, and this added plans reviewers and deputy fire marshals who could go out to construction sites and better integrate the fire protection and prevention process at the point of planning for and erecting new buildings. In 2007, one of the largest fires in the city's history destroyed 12 4-unit townhome buildings off Capitol Boulevard. The Pine Knoll Towns fire was caused when pine straw was ignited near a building. The pine straw caught the siding on fire. The siding and the fire spread up and into the soffits and into the attic space. It was a windy day, which caused rapid fire spread. The fire had 6 alarms with $4 million of damage and 27 homes destroyed. In January 2008, the fire department suffered another line of duty death. Lieutenant Herman Jones, who had a heart attack while he was sleeping at Fire Station 10, he died later at the hospital. In the 2010s, some of the things that happened: we relocated Fire Station 12, we moved it further east on Pool Road. A new heavy rescue, this time a walk-in rescue, was delivered in 2018. A third tiller, by this time we had 3 of them. Also something called hydraulic rescue tools, because up until this time, the jaws of life required a tether. They had a hose connected to a hydraulic pump, and both the pump and the mechanical jaws were heavy, unwieldy. Now, these jaws of life and other tools for extrication were lighter, much easier to use, and would be carried on the rescue truck as well as all of the ladder trucks. A couple of the larger fires in the 2010s, the Metropolitan Fire, this one even larger than Pine Knoll Towns. It might be the largest fire in the city's history in the last 100 to 150 years. It destroyed a 4-story mixed-use building that was under construction, went to 5 alarms. Also in Glenwood Towers, a 3-alarm fire in 2018. The fire was contained to a single unit, but the entire building was evacuated, and it took about 40 minutes to put that fire under control, as memory serves. Also, during the 2010s, you saw an expansion of the Office of the Fire Marshal. For decades, there were just a few people assigned to what was called the Fire Prevention Division, later the Office of the Fire Marshal, and by fiscal year 2007 and then into 2008, the size of the division would double, and that would increase the ability of the Raleigh Fire Department to help prevent fires and take proactive action, as well as the standard reactive suppression role. In 2013, rescue resources were reorganized. So in 2013, we had 3 rescue units, 3 rescue companies. They had 2 people each. And in 2013, things were changed. They combined those 3 rescues and made a single 5-person heavy rescue company. And then they converted 2 of the engine companies into squad companies. These squad companies would operate rescue pumpers. The personnel would get extra training. The units would carry extra rescue tools. Then in 2014, 2 special units, dedicated rescue pumpers that were spec'd and purpose built for that purpose, were delivered. In 2015, Station 29 opened, and we received our second tiller. And I've kind of jumped around a little because we're going to get a third tiller here a couple of years later. And we put the 9th ladder company in service. Station 29 incidentally opened on June 9th, my birthday that year. Now let's go even faster as we go from 2016 to present day. 2016 to 2025. Some of the big things that have happened in the last 9 years. Fire Chief Herbert Griffin, he was appointed on September 8th, and he was from outside the fire department. He was a chief at the Houston Fire Department. He is our 4th chief of department from outside, hired from outside the city of Raleigh, did not rise up through the ranks. During these 9 years, we rebuilt Fire Station 6, demolished the old 1949 building and rebuilt it on the same grounds. We renovated Fire Station 11 off Capitol Boulevard to make it larger. Fire Station 14 relocated around the corner from its current facility and relocated to a much larger building. Fire Station 22 on Durant Road moved about a mile west because the property was impacted by a planned railroad crossing expansion. The new facility much larger. Also during this time period, COVID, the global pandemic, started in 2019, and it had an impact ranging from crews having to be quarantined when they had an infection, to impacts on call volume, city budgets, revenue streams, reduction of travel, all sorts of factors. Dashboards. You see on the upper right a computer dashboard, an application showing the various metrics of how departments and measured outcomes in the fire department are functioning at a given period. The age of the internet, faster, smaller computers means more and more metrics, analytics, and data are at the hands of those in the roles of planning for and running the fire department. In 2020, we had civil unrest in downtown Raleigh a number of days, and the fire department was impacted, having to respond into dangerous situations. They also put select special units in place, such as bringing the mini pumpers downtown, having firefighters called back from off duty, staffing them as special response units to help expand fire protection. Decontamination and prevention of cancer-causing exposure to firefighters has come into the foreground in recent years. And some of the cancer preventive strategies have included um, washing off firefighters, washing off potential carcinogens at the fire scene, both off their gear, then washing the gear, isolating it from the crew areas, and other preventative measures. Also, during these years, we had 3 more line of duty deaths. Keith Tessanier, Brett Upton, and Nathan Burgess, all 3 of them died of occupational hazard from 2019 to 2023. A new the first high water rescue vehicle was delivered in recent years. This is a vehicle designed to drive through flooded areas to help rescue people. It's not a swift water unit. It's not designed to be driving where there's moving water, but stationary. A new Ladder 22, a new mid-mount Pierce was delivered. The incident safety officer position was created, a captain's position. They are on shift and they respond to all structure fires and other types of incidents where they can add the role of extra eyes and being attentive and performing actions to keep the crews safe. We also had the first short academy in quite some time, maybe in at least 10 or 15 years, where we had 2 academies, 2 recruit academies running concurrent, one group that graduated within just several weeks because they were hired with credentials. They were hired already with firefighter and EMT training, and then the longer traditional academy, usually about 6 months long, for the other applicants who were hired without any required level of experience or certification. The position of chaplain was created in recent years, as well as the first fire department psychologist, Dr. Don. The first one and only lateral academy was held in recent years, where we hired firefighters not only with experience, but with a couple years experience under their belt, and they were hired and thus were considered as somebody who had already been here a couple years, within the tenure, how they are recognized as having longevity and tenure. Also a rehab unit, an extended step van designed to provide rehab services on scene at fires and other extended incidents, bringing water and pre-cooked or prepackaged refreshments and sustenance. There's also a bathroom in the back, a wash station on the side of the unit. A big fleet upgrade is one of the biggest things that's happened in the last 12 months, where we have received 12 or will be receiving 12 new engines for starters. And this is helping to upgrade the pumping engines, which were getting older, and the reserve engines were getting older. And this fleet upgrade has also included a new air truck, as well as a couple new ladder trucks. Station 3, under construction on Rock Quarry Road, a new location being relocated from East Street. Station 7 on Glasscock Street, currently undergoing renovations. And just a couple months ago, a new master plan was received. This was a consultant's report that was commissioned to find out, well, what does the fire department need? What are the action steps that are needed? What does the data show with regard to station planning, programs, staffing, and other needs that the fire department has, and as a way to use this to help support requests for more people, more money, and guide the direction of the fire department going forward. So that brings us to today, 2025, Raleigh Fire Department with 632 uniformed and civilian members, most of which are in operations, most of which are firefighter suppression positions. And this history is expectedly heavy on the suppression history. Here's the organizational chart yet again. We forgot to add one milestone in our slides, and that was the addition of emergency management. That happened, I'm going to say 3 years ago or so, when the city's emergency management department moved under the fire department with a new deputy director as well as a support person. Here's a map showing all the fire stations and the 5 battalions. Are there questions? Well, you can't ask questions because I'm here, but you're not. But you can see those slides, these slides on my website. You can certainly send me an email and I will answer questions. Happy to tell you anything you want to know about the fire department and its history. That concludes today's presentation recording. Thank you for watching.